Hello, welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. We have a returning guest who's been here with us before. And this book, Bound for Gold, Mr. William Martin, I think you've undone yourself. I wonder how you
Thank
ever
you.
get all the characters in the pages.
Yeah.
How many names, when you do an outline, do you still do an outline like we were taught in
Well,
English?
with this book, I did more of an outline than I did on the last book. It just depends on how I feel, what kind of pressure is on me, what I think I need to figure out before I get started. And with this book, I had to do an outline mostly for the modern sections of the story, but also to figure out how to piece it all
Mesh them
together.
together.
Because, people who read these Peter Fallon novels know that they're going to get the past, and then they're going to get Peter Fallon in the present, and then the past, and then the present. And this one all takes place in one moment in time, which is the California Gold Rush. And it's a journal written by a young man who goes to the gold rush in 1849 and has many adventures.
Oh, many. How many characters?
Oh, I don't know. I have never
I
counted
lost
all the
count
characters.
after 25.
Really? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but they all stand out in your
they
mind,
do.
don't
They're,
they?
And they're
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very specific.
Yeah.
Are they like old friends when you finish the book?
Well, this bunch were, because don't forget, this novel, as I wrote in the introduction, was born in 1974 when I was a graduate student at the USC Film School. Now it's called the School of Cinema Television. And I wrote a screenplay about the Gold Rush that won the Hal Wallace Screenwriting Fellowship. I got to meet the famous Hal Wallace, who produced Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy,
You must have
all
thought
of
you
those
were
things.
right up there.
Well, I got my name on the cover of Variety. They gave me $2,500, and it was the first time that anybody other than my wife had ever called me a writer. So yeah, I was.
Were you 25, 26?
Yeah, 26. And the characters in that screenplay and the events are the characters and events in the first 2/3 of the historical section of Bound for Gold. And Hal Wallace didn't want to make a movie out of it, unfortunately. So then I went on and invented Peter Fallon, and Back Bay became a big hit. And from there I was able to have a career and not have to have a real job. And so my editor a few years ago said to me, Bill, there's a great novel in the Gold Rush. And I said, you might be right. And I dug the screenplay out because I had always felt that there was another whole act to the lives of those characters. And that was what I built in addition to the material that I was working from 1974. And it was a lot of fun to revisit that world and to see it now through the eyes of Peter Fallon and his girlfriend Evangeline, who have now appeared in 6 of my novels, 6 of the 11.
And blended so well. I'm reading about Peter Fallon and his lady, and then all of a sudden I'm back 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's not a shock. It's a lovely mesh of comprehension and understanding.
Well, the transition is always the part that is most important when you're going from past to present and present to past. That sense that you have been satisfied in one chapter, and now I'm going to take you into another world, and it's going to flow smoothly, and I'll pay off in that chapter too.
And your historical research is unbelievable. And you enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I think that the opportunity to get out and travel around in the gold country and meet interesting people and look down head frames into deep into the mines and pan for gold, which I did.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Did you find any?
Yeah, a few flecks. You wouldn't be able to see them if I held them up for you, but yes, I did.
But you found them. That's the important thing.
And I actually panned for gold just about a mile downstream from where gold was first discovered
Sutter's.
in 1848, and that got the whole thing started. Took about a year to get people really crazy, because in those days communication was far more difficult than it is
Today you could
today,
call for a flash
obviously.
mob.
Right, you could have a flash mob in the gold rush. That's true. But back then, it took 6 months to get to California or to get back.
Or die trying.
So, right, exactly. So that the first news of gold, which was January of 1848, was kind of closely held by Sutter and the people around him, because they didn't want, it
What
wasn't
happened?
it wasn't that they were greedy. What they didn't want was the word to get out, because when it happened, they knew that the world would just overflow.
in their
California.
privacy and their
Right.
property would be abused, and you intertwined that in the lady who wouldn't give up the farm and the vineyard.
Later on, in
Yes.
the modern story. But in 1848, Sutter and his mill manager, John Marshall, who discovered the gold, the first nugget, they had no idea of what they had actually discovered, which was an enormous band of gold stretching 250 miles north to south and about 50 miles east to west. And once word got out, which took a few months in California, and then about basically 11 months, the word did not reach the United States and the President James Knox Polk, until December of that year. But once word got out, the whole world went crazy.
Yep.
And they all had to figure out how to get to California.
And we hear a lot of stories and see a lot of documentaries about the wagon trains
Yep.
and the families that moved, but your characters go by ship.
Yes. Well, there were 3 ways to get to California. You could walk with a wagon beside you, because you didn't ride in the wagon. You would wear out the livestock. You could walk. You could go by steamer and then walk across Panama and hope that there was another steamer ready to take you. Or you could do it the New England way, which was to leave Boston, sail all the way down to the bottom of the world, turn around and sail all the way back. And believe it or not, the safest way was that way.
Really?
Yeah, because the New England shipmasters knew how to do it. And they had figured out how to deal with scurvy and other dietary problems, so that nobody was going to die because of that. And there were very few deaths on the Round the Horn Passage, even though hundreds of ships traveled that way. The deaths were mostly on the wagon trains, and not from the Sioux and Cheyenne attacking the wagon trains. They were something of a worry, but nowhere near as worrisome as cholera and other diseases of the...
And just plain body wear.
Right, and the wearing, and then yellow fever and malaria would get you when you were crossing Panama. So it was a journey fraught with dangers, as they say. And in my novel, I'd create a fictional company. About 140 of these companies were organized in Greater Boston, just Greater Boston alone, in January and February of 1849 to go to the gold rush. You'd get 120 guys. They'd put up like $200 for tools, food, and provisions, and the ship, and they would all band together, signed articles of incorporation, and head for California. All those companies fell apart shortly after they arrived in California, because most of them realized that it was every man for himself, and most of them had gotten really sick of everybody else that they were around.
Right, elbow to armpit all the way.
After being crammed onto those ships.
And didn't you have to leave your gun and your weapons custodially kept by somebody else? So you really had nothing to defend yourself if the guy right there wasn't the nicest person on earth.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So those were kind of close quarters, but they pulled it off, and your main character is a reporter of sorts, and he's gone to write
Yes.
about what happens
Yes.
and send it back to Boston so Boston knows what really happened.
Right. Right.
But how intuitive he was, and for not being a rough and tumble, he does a very good job.
Right. Right.
And I love the way that after he married, he set up the warehouse to sell shovels, Ames shovels
Ames
and
shovels
picks.
from Easton, Massachusetts.
And
That's right.
they certainly couldn't dig for gold without those tools.
Well, the thing about the gold rush that is perhaps the most salient fact is that most of the people who went there with grand visions of getting rich quick by digging into a gravel bank did not get rich quick. They might have made money, but they didn't get rich quick. The ones that made the money were the ones who figured out how to, as the expression went, mine the miners, sell the miners what they really needed. And not just up in the gold country, but in San Francisco itself. And James Spencer, the main character, who goes to California with the ambition of writing about the adventure. He's one of those young men who probably doesn't need the money because he comes from family money, but what he needs is a sense of the grandeur of the world and of his ability to operate a sense of value. That's right. A lot of young men went to California because they wanted to see the elephant, as they said, have that great experience of life before they settled down to a life of domesticity and perhaps boredom. And so he's out there, and he's smart enough to see that if he can pull it off, selling shovels will mean a lot more.
But didn't he choose a good life partner? She was cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody was going to put her down. And
don't
she
give
arrives,
too much away about the girlfriend.
She arrives to surprise him, and he thought that she was this genteel, lovely lady. And boy, I liked her.
Thank you. I liked her too. You know, she goes through a lot in the story, but that's what good stories are about: is taking people, taking fictional characters, and putting them through an experience the like of which they could never have imagined.
But you blend in historical factuality as well.
Yep.
So it's very, very possible.
I shake San Francisco to the ground in the opening scene, which is like a flashback.
And then you burn it down how many times?
And I burn it 2 or 3 times, and each of those fires actually happened pretty much as it's described in the book. San Francisco was called by Bayard Taylor, the New York Times reporter, when he looked out at it from the ship, the city of glowing canvas. Don't forget, in 1848, there had only been 900 people in San Francisco. And most of them, when they found out about the gold, all headed up 100 miles up into the mountains. Within a year, there were 10,000, 15,000, and 100,000 people passing through on their way to the gold country. So San Francisco exploded. Prices went up on everything.
And diversity came in.
Right, exactly. I mean, San Francisco was, at the beginning, a very diverse place simply because everybody from all over the world was trying to get there. And it was easier to get to California from China on a ship sailing down the westerlies than it was to get there from Boston. And of course, that led to all kinds of conflicts later on in the story. The novel is about building a civilization, really. It's about the challenges that we face when we come to a new place, people from all over the world, and we all have to figure out how to get along together.
If you change the clothes and you put an iPad in the hand instead of a pick, it's very reminiscent of today.
Right.
It could be a mirror. And what's that quote? If we don't learn from history, we'll learn to live to regret it.
That's right. When I first started writing this screenplay way back in 1974, I was struck by the fact that while the miners were very were very thoughtful about how they ran their interpersonal government in their own little neighborhoods. Wow, here's a strike. Let's all get together and decide on how much land each of us can mark off and how long we have to work on it, and so forth and so on. You know, at that level, it was like a New England town meeting.
Or a pirate ship.
Right. Well, yeah, a pirate ship too. I
They
prefer the more exalted
But I
New
was
England.
amazed that they wrote contracts and
Yeah,
elected their
sure.
own captain, and if you got hit and lost a leg, you got a bonus. And
Oh, yeah.
so it, you know, some form of government, no matter how much we hate the word,
Right.
has to be in order to.
Exactly. And so they understood that in the mines, and they understood it back out on the coast where they had a constitutional convention which allowed California to petition for statehood and get it within a year, faster than any other American territory before or since. But that California legislature figured out that the best way for them to pay for their own existence and for a government was to tax all the foreigners.
What a surprise.
What a surprise. And they taxed the Chinese and the Mexicans and the Chileans, leaving aside for a moment the fact that the Mexicans had all been there before they had gotten there. And I just felt when I was 24 years old that this really wasn't very fair, was it? This wasn't the right thing. And so I came back to that in the novel, and I was quite shocked by what just you're pointing out now, that the more things change, the more they stay the same.
And yet, in mixing the cultures, in accepting diversity, they learn from one another. And why don't we ever learn from that?
Yeah.
I mean, the Chinese taught them how to build a sluice
Right.
that everybody else wanted to copy and were insanely jealous at what it was producing.
Yeah.
But instead of learning from it, they blew it up.
Yep. Well, human beings are interesting creatures.
Now, when somebody
if they weren't, I wouldn't have a job.
When somebody asks you how long it took you to write it, do you start in 74?
Well, I start there, but the truth is that it was about 3 years from beginning to end. And that's about average for all of my books, somewhere between 2 and 4 years. I wish I could write them more quickly, but...
Well, I'm not.
Yeah.
Because the thought, the research, the effort, and the fluidity is worth waiting for.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
I
you saying that.
have to literally, because I keep the book in the car,
Yeah.
and I read it whenever somebody's playing baseball or I'm waiting to pick somebody up or I'm in the doctor's office.
Yep.
And if I leave the cover on, people engage me in conversation, and I don't get to read.
Oh, well, but they might go out and buy the book. No, I always love hearing about people reading my books in public places.
Oh,
and
yeah?
seeing the covers. Yeah.
There's always a book in my car, because whether you realize it or not, you're always caught. Now, the majority of people check their phone
Yep.
or play a juice game or something on it.
That's right.
I have a book,
Yeah.
and I think I get more from reading than this
Veronica,
thing.
you're old school, just like
Definitely.
me.
Thanks. I needed that.
No, old school is a compliment. I think that we can't lose the habit of reading. We
Or writing.
can't. Well, or writing.
What do you
course,
think of
but-
them not teaching children cursive anymore in the schools?
Oh, I can't. I think that's terrible.
I can't imagine doing
Right,
a research
right.
project. How are you going?
How
It's
you
hard
going-
enough reading script in Old English,
That's true.
and then you take cursive away too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't send my kids out into the world that ill-equipped.
Yeah.
If they were still in school and not learning cursive, they'd
Yeah.
write cursive at home.
Yeah.
I think that diminishes their ability.
The Palmer method.
Yes, perfect, Palmer.
That's right. And I had terrible handwriting then and now.
Now, do you still write longhand, or you do it all on a computer?
Oh, I wrote 2 novels longhand on loose leaf. And in both instances, when I was finished,
Carpal tunnel?
and you have that wonderful experience of completing a novel. There's a great rush. And then you look at this pile of manuscript, and my piles of manuscript would be that high.
I believe it.
And nobody could read my writing or my notations so that I could give it to a typist. I had to type the thing. And that would take another 5 to 6 weeks sometimes. And I finally trained myself, once word processors came along, to work on a word processor.
I don't like spell check. It puts in words.
Well,
that
they
I
get
don't
in the
want.
spell check gets in the way, particularly if you're using contractions or proper names, or you have so many characters in this that who have interesting names and
Yes.
nicknames and so
Yes.
on. That
And in the diversity, we're going to stop and we're going to have you read a passage or two so the viewers can know the literary voyage that I
Okay.
enjoy at your hand.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
This is a passage from the notebook of James Spencer, The Journal, right after the night when he thinks he has found gold. Before the sun had cleared the treetops, we knew. I had washed our dishes in a gravel bank that rendered a spoonful of gold for every shovel of dirt it turned. By 8 o'clock, we had learned how to placer mine, a process as repetitive and exhausting as working a loom in a Lowell mill. Dig, dump, clear, crouch, dip, swirl, bounce, dip, swirl, swirl, and do it all day long. Dig gravel from the bank or from under the rocks, in the bends and the bars where the river slows and the sediment drops. Dump the gravel into the pan, clear the rocks and then the stones, crouch by the river and dip the pan, swirl away the lighter sands, bounce to bring out the blackest sands, then dip and swirl, down and down, down to the bottom and the beautiful gold. For the only thing heavier than black sand is gold. By 10 o'clock, my partner, Michael Flynn, was suffering a high-grade case of gold fever, which caused him to work faster and ever faster, filling and swirling, dipping and bouncing, never stopping, seldom breathing, and talking less than ever before. If it is true that life is no more than an accumulation of dreams and memories, then Michael Flynn that morning was seeing a bright dream burn away his harshest memories, all because of gold. He dreamed of going back to Boston, the city that welcomed him with no Irish need apply. He imagined squiring beautiful women, downing champagne and oysters, living on Beacon Hill, and the more color he saw in his pan, the brighter grew his dream, the faster moved his hands, the hotter burned his brain pan. Gold fever may kill in time, but like the hallucinations of the febrile man, it may also clarify his vision before death overtakes him. He knows that gold, so beautiful, so indestructible, so rare, has value and utility. But so, he may tell himself, does iron, and from iron a man can fashion a nail. Then he can build a house. From gold, however, he can fashion a future. So dig fast, dig deep, bounce hard, and swirl again. Every holy Bostonian assembling in the snow aboard the William Winter, every unholy soul inhaling the greed fog of San Francisco, every know-it-all that sailed with us up the Sacramento, every one of them had suffered symptoms of this affliction, else they would not have left civilization in the first place. But no man comes down with a killing case of gold fever until he turns his own dirt and finds wealth by the work of his own hand, as we did that first day.
Now, Michael Flynn is lovable.
Yes.
He's a character, typical Bostonian,
Yep.
typical Irishman. And for all of his nefarious
Yeah.
habits,
Yes.
he died for loyalty.
Yes.
From
Yeah.
page 1, when San Francisco is glowing,
Yeah.
through 7 journals written 100 years ago,
Yeah.
to being as loyal to a friend.
Yeah. yeah.
who
Well,
you didn't
that's-
like in the very beginning. But isn't that true of most of your friends? If they
Oh,
really embrace you, you
yeah.
find up loving them for life.
That's right. That's right. Those two guys don't start off on the right foot.
No,
but,
they don't. No,
but they come to like each other when all is said and done. And the truth is that when I wrote the screenplay, I created these two characters way back when. The young Harvard-educated guy who was all of the mind, the one who wrote what we've just heard, and the character who is a waiter in a gentleman's club in Boston in the opening scene, an Irish guy who has come trying to and is hoping to escape the prejudices of Boston at the time, which were toward the Irish. And they find themselves on the same ship and will eventually team up in that grand journey from San Francisco up into the gold country.
Right.
Yeah.
But isn't panning for gold
Yeah.
almost the same as making a friend?
Yeah. Yeah.
Over time, you sort through, and when times are really tough,
Yep.
the true friendship shows forth and it glows.
Yeah. That's
And you
true.
can depend on it.
Nicely put.
Well, glad to call you friend.
Well, I am
Thank
glad
you
to call
so
you
much
friend.
to have
Thank
come
you.
back to see us for the third time.
Yes.
What's the next book?
The next book is called December 41. It's a little departure. It's a World War II thriller.
Oh, wow.
Begins on the day after Pearl Harbor and ends on Christmas Eve. Begins with an FBI raid in Los Angeles where they're rounding up the Japanese and the German people that they've been keeping their eye on for
They're
a
gonna put 'em
while.
in those awful camps.
Yeah, well, one of the Germans gets away.
Ooh.
I am not giving you any more hints.
Well, but
I will
you,
come back when December 41 comes out.
You will. We're
Yes.
going to keep that to a
Yes.
promise.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
The book
Thanks.
is Bound for Gold. It's an adventure personified. My guest has been William Martin. Thank you for joining us. Bye.